Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and welcome to the first bonus episode of the 2021 ChemKnits Hanukkah special, or Night 9. Through the course of the first 8 videos, I had so much fun using more and more of my premixed acid dyes that I have in my collection. But tonight, I want to change gears and mix 125 different colors using only 6 different acid dyes. Because while it is so much fun to play around with different premixed colors, you don't need to have 80 different colors of acid dyes to have an infinite number of colors at your disposal. And so I hope that tonight's color mixing video will help you see how you only need a couple of colors and then you can create just about anything you want. Tonight we are going to mix 5 different rainbow colors with black to create shades of those colors and see how much variation we can get. I have done something similar in the Summer Mini Skein mini-series with blue, and I will be following a similar recipe and setup for all of our examples today. Over the course of this video, I will be putting different labels up on the screen to talk about the different depth of shade of the colors we are going to mix. Depth of shade is the number of grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn. So a 1% depth of shade would be 1 gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn, and a 0.5% depth of shade would be 0.5 gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn, or 1 gram of dye per 200 grams of yarn. I do have videos on the math of yarn dyeing where I talk about all of this further. And then in the end, I will share all of the colors that we have mixed, labeled with the depths of shades to create those proportions that you can screenshot as a super handy reference. Similar to this blue one right here. Now, before I show you the colors I've selected and we jump into this mixing intensive video, please make sure you are subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel, give the video a thumbs up, and leave a comment below to let me know which color you are most excited to see. Since we've already done this project with blue, I thought it would be fun to pick 5 other main rainbow colors that we could do this project with. Red, orange, yellow, green, and purple. Now, there's other colors I would like to do this with in the future, say a pink, but this I think is a really great start. And I tried to pick colors that are reasonably well saturated, because when I did the blue, I didn't use, say, a primary blue, I used extreme blue. Which I don't believe is actually a primary color. And so of these, Brilliant Yellow is a primary color. It is probably the least intense out of these other ones, but I'm still gonna try to go at this at the same depth of shade for everything. So let's get started with our purple. To make our 1% stock solutions, I put on my Deluxe Rubber Respirator Mask with P100 filters, safety glasses, and gloves. This is my personal safety setup that I use whenever I am dealing with dry dye powder. Then, using a small scale that is dedicated for dyeing yarn and isn't ever used for food, I measured out 2 grams of the Royal Purple acid dye and 1 gram of the True Black acid dye. Then, using warm tap water, I dissolved the purple in a total of 200 milliliters of liquid and the True Black in a total of 100 milliliters of liquid. I wanted to mix up the dyes fresh before each of these mixing projects to have as much consistency as possible. We will have a tiny bit of leftover dye. Don't worry, I have some yarn on hand to help use up any leftovers we may have. But this is the process that I will go through for each of the 5 sets to make sure that I have enough dye for setting up our grid. We have our 1% stock solutions now, and just another reminder, a 1% stock solution is 1 gram of dye dissolved in 100 milliliters of liquid. And this is the concentration that I use to calculate how much dye we will add to each of our 25 containers. My favorite way to do mixing projects like this is to set up a cool vat where I am going to mix our yarn with the dye into these containers, let them sit for, I would say, 24 to sometimes up to 72 hours to let the color slowly absorb. Then I can go ahead and steam them in my steamer basket in batches, and that makes it a lot easier. Whereas if I was doing this in mason jars and then needed to go set up like a double boiler to heat set up, that would take more time on the stove for these samples, so it's easier to set it up. It just means that for each set of 25, this video is gonna span a very long period of time. Now I am going to start adding our dye. The blues are gonna increase across the columns, and then the black, which will start here in the second row. There's gonna be no black in the first row. The blacks will increase going this way. And our blacks are gonna range from a 0.5% depth of shade all the way to a 0.0625% depth of shade. Well, technically 0, because there's no black up here. And then the blues are gonna range from the 1% to the 0.0625%. I will label all of these at the end, so then we have a nice picture like this one for blue, where you can see the different depths of shade labeled, so then it is a handy reference. So when it comes to the blue, to get the desired depth of shade, we are going to add 20 milliliters, 10 milliliters, 5, 2.5, and then 1.25 milliliters of our 1% stock solution to every column. And then when it comes to the black, we will be adding 10 milliliters to this row, then 5, 2.5, and 1.25 milliliters. For these measurements, I will be using graduated syringes to measure out the color, using a syringe that is as close to the volume I want to add as possible to have the most consistent and precise measurements I can. Starting with the purple, I probably have said blue before. I keep wanting to say blue because I am referencing the numbers I used when I did this with Extreme Blue and True Black. But we're using Royal Purple. I added the dye to each of the containers that already have 1 cup of plain room temperature tap water in them. 200 milliliters was enough, but also like barely enough. So Rebecca, maybe get 250 milliliters of your 1% stock. It's hard to see what the colors are doing because the dye, even though it's not mixed, everything looks so opaque. But let's go ahead and add the black. I did rinse out the syringes and I saved the leftover dye from there. And we started measuring out the black, once again starting with the deepest and going to the lightest row. Now I want to stir everything up, starting with the lightest, and technically this column all has the same amount of purple, but we do have increasing amounts of black as we go down. So I am doing it this way because, oh no. Oh dear. Because, well, what I was going to say as I attempt to remedy that, all right, what I was going to say, now I'm going to wipe off the fork before stirring the next one, is that having a little bit of this container go into this one isn't going to make a difference on the amount of black that we have in relation to the purple. But if I mixed this cup, which has a lot more black, and then went into the cup with no black, that could introduce some pigment. So that is why I mix this way. In all of the other samples, I plan to speed up this process because I think that while the setup is really fun and I really enjoy doing it, it will be fairly repetitive, but I do want you to see it because sometimes, like right now, everything just looks rather dark, except for maybe this one right here, which is the lightest color. But once we go to, say, our yellow, we may see things that feel more different. And so I'm extremely excited to see how all of these colors are going to turn out. We are going to be dyeing 2 different yarn bases that are both 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. For our purples, I am going to use the fingering weight version, but for some of these other colors, we will be using the DK version of this yarn. And I have pre-soaked it for a couple of hours at room temperature in some plain tap water with no acid. But now let's go add the yarn to the dye. One of the main differences between this video and the rest of the Hanukkah special is that tonight we are adding 20-gram mini skeins to each of these containers versus the 10-gram minis we used in the other videos. I squeezed out some of the tap water and started adding these to the cups one at a time. As I press the yarn into the containers, then you really can start to see the difference between the different colors. And I feel like it did with the blue. It almost feels like there's a corner, that corner with the least amount of purple and no black, that corner is blown out because of the way it feels like there's a light shining onto everything with a really dark corner. On camera, I think it's hard to see the difference between these colors on the bottom row and the far column. But I would say that this color right here feels much more gray, and then that one over there feels more purple. But I think that it'll be much easier to see once the dye has absorbed. And I'm really, really happy with the balance I think that we got here. So now I just need to go ahead and add acid to each of the containers. So I added 1 teaspoon of white vinegar to each container, gave it a little stir, and then added on a cover so that way I could set these aside for 24 to 72 hours, or when it looks like the color has absorbed, if the purple will absorb with this Cool Vat technique. Sometimes I let the yarn sit in the pot a little bit before I go ahead and add the vinegar, but that's not what I'm going to do today. If some of the yarn is a little more tonal, that is fine with me. But if you want the color to be a little more even, there is still technically space in each of these containers. You could add a little bit more water, and that shouldn't cause any problems. To leave no dye behind, I thought since I used the fingering weight yarn for the purple samples, I would use a skein of Swish DK, which is from Knit Picks 100% Superwash Merino for the yarn mop with our purple mixture. And I'm going to start, this was just pre-soaked in plain tap water with no acid. I'm going to start adding on this dye that I rinsed from the syringes and cups. So my tap water is slightly acidic, but I'm not, it looks like some things are starting to strike, which is fun. We don't have a ton of dye left over. I am going to add water to those cups, but actually first I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teaspoons, which is equivalent to 2 tablespoons, because a teaspoon is 5 milliliters and a tablespoon is 15, of white vinegar to this shoebox. And I'm gonna get more water, and there's not very much of this purple dye left, but at the same time there's more than what I have added on already. So I am, ooh, there's some red pigments at the bottom. Going back and forth to mix as much as possible out of this cup, and then pouring it on to our yarn. Now some things may strike pretty quickly, others might not, but I am moving the yarn in here to get as much coverage as I can of our yarn. So right now I have something that is a combination, I would say, of purple and gray, but it's about to get a lot more gray. I'm gonna take, say, about half of this black, and I'm adding it in a larger volume to help me distribute it over the yarn. And I plan to do something similar with the leftovers. I may end up with more leftovers of colors in some of the other projects, but I just wanted to show, I guess, in real time how quickly I really am just adding this color in, moving things around to layer the color on our yarn and get something that is soft but still variegated. So I am now going to place a cover on this container and go ahead and set it outside with the other samples. But the plan will be to steam set this in the same way that I do the other yarn. Here is what my setup looks like outside. This is the next morning, and
Actually, it looked like the water on even the deepest ones was clear a couple hours after I set it out here. So I'm going to bring it inside, rinse off the containers to remove any like tree bits, and then remove the lids. I'm actually going to start with the Leave No Dye Behind. And we have this beautiful lavender gray color. This is actually really, really pretty. All of the dye has absorbed, and I am going to go start steam setting this for 30 minutes in a steamer basket that I will likely add some more of the samples to shortly. It is always so impressive to me how, well, two things. One, how much it seems like this quarter is blown out, like there's too much light here, but also how much more clarity there is once the color has absorbed, which I know makes sense. I really do, and I think when the yarn is dry it'll be more apparent. I do see a difference even in between these two shades where there's a lot more black or more purple. And I would say that of colors that stand out to me right now, I really like this dusty purple right here. Like this one is really exciting. And I also really like this very purplish gray. I think that this color is unique and something that I definitely want to mix again, because I don't think that I have something that is quite this dusty as a purple in my collection. Although when I look back at how all the different purples I swatched, I could be wrong, but this color really, really excites me. And just to demonstrate, this is our most saturated color right here that has a 1% depth of shade of the Royal Purple and a 0.5% depth of shade of True Black. So it is the one with the most pigment, and the water in the cup is completely clear. Unfortunately, I do need to reset the cups before we do the next color, because I like to have the yarn in before we add acid in case there's a color that strikes super quickly. Sometimes if we do see breaking, that is really, really fun, but I want to at least be able to try to have the colors somewhat even so that way we can compare them. I removed the rest of the mini skeins from the containers and went and steamed them in a steamer basket on the stovetop for 30 minutes. I did add a removable nylon zip tie around each set of 5 to keep things organized and to prevent tangles. I just wanted to pop back in to say I have no idea why some of these up here that weren't the most pigmented, I guess these ones were the medium for purple, but I have no idea why we still have a little bit of color left in here when we didn't at similar depths of shade of purple. So anyway, that just feels odd. But I am going to go rinse out all these cups to reset for our next color. We have finished steaming the purple yarn. I actually turned off the stove a little bit ago. That's why you didn't see the steam pop up. But now I am going to remove them and set them aside so they can finish cooling. And while we're at it, I will grab our deeper colors and our bonus skein. Let's wash our purple yarn. I think I'm just gonna go for the darkest two just to show on camera, but I'm not expecting there to be any bleeding, but you never know. Royal Purple is not a color I know very well. So sometime it could be fun to do this where I'm pre-mix, like where I only start with primary colors in black, and so I mix the secondary colors I want to use, but I'm not seeing any bleeding. So that would be fun. Let me know down below. A lot of the pre-mix, when I mix my own colors, sometimes those are more likely to break, which can also be fun. But anyway, I am going to rinse out the soap, finish washing all the rest of the yarn off camera, put it through my spin dryer, and hang it up to dry. But I will make a note if any of our green, orange, yellow, or red mixtures end up bleeding a lot. I will create some footage to share that. But otherwise, let's go start mixing up the rest of our colors. Going forward, I am going to start off by measuring 2.5 grams of our color and dissolving that into 250 milliliters of warm tap water.
And I will measure out 1.5 grams of True Black and dissolve that into 150 milliliters. And I shifted this because although I had pretty much exactly enough previously, I'd like to have a little extra in case there is a spill and I have to reset a cup. And, well, it'll make the bonus skein at the end a little more pigmented. I reset my 25 cups for our green and black mixture. And starting with 1 cup of water in each cup, I added between 20 and 1.25 milliliters of our green dye to each of the columns, and then I added between 10 and 1.25 milliliters of our 1% True Black to various rows, leaving the top row just our green. This time I am using the DK Weight 75% Superwash Merino 25% nylon yarn. I added the yarn into the cups, stirred it, and then added 1 teaspoon of white vinegar to each of the cups and stirred it up one more time before setting the yarn outside for 24 to 72-ish hours. You may have noticed me checking one of the greens a few times. I was concerned I forgot to add the black to 1 cup. But as I was adding the yarn, it really became apparent that I did in fact add the black because we had so many different gorgeous shades of green. From our brighter saturated emerald all the way down, I think at their most saturated color, to a gorgeous hunter green. For the leftover green and black dye, I decided to use the same dye bath that we just used with the purple, and then added the green. I rinsed off syringes and spoons, and then layered on the green and then the black, moving things all over. I have a feeling this will be a little more semi-solid than the purple because there is a lot more pigment that'll take more time to absorb, but I am excited to see where we end up with it. I also placed this outside to chill with our 25 green and black mixtures. The next morning, I brought in all of the yarn and starting with our bonus skein, removed the yarn, squeezed out the liquid, and put it in a steamer basket to steam set for 30 minutes, at least 30 minutes. All of these green hues are gorgeous. I think that one that stands out to me right off the bat is this one right here, where we have a green that feels almost sage-like. And I really, really like that. That's something that isn't a color that I often get from the pre-mixed dyes. Same with, I guess, a lot of the muted hues, but this one is really exciting to me. There was a little bit of green left behind in our bonus skein and a few of the samples, but the amount of green that was left behind isn't enough to really shift that color. So I didn't worry about it very much and proceeded to the steam setting. I did notice that some of the color that is left behind was because sometimes there's a little bit of dye up near the lip of the container that then gets washed down. And so that is one source of the extra color, but most of the color did absorb to the yarn overnight, thankfully for the very hot summer days that we have right now. Once the yarn had cooled, I went ahead and washed it off camera with dish soap like I showed for the purple. And if you don't see me come back to the washing, that means that there was no bleeding, and so I hung up the yarn to dry so then we could start looking at yellow. Both of the purple and green held up really well against the black depths of shade from 0.0625% all the way to 0.5% depth of shade. The yellow I'm a little more nervous about because overall yellow is less pigmented than any of the other colors we're dealing with. If you get a yellow dye that is super saturated, it turns to orange. In fact, a lot of yellow speckles can lean a lot more orange, which is fun, but you know, also just is a reality. So I wasn't sure how the yellow would really play with the black. I did consider with the yellow doing different proportions here. So instead of having 1 and 1/16, maybe I would start with 2 or 4 to give more of a range. And I do want to point out that the big thing that looks different to me right now is that rather than it feeling like there's a light shining right here that's sort of radiating down, This time it feels like there's more like a bar light all the way down here. And there are differences across each row, but it is very, very subtle. And so it almost looks much more similar as you go row by row, which I think comes down to the yellow being less pigmented. But anyway, now I am going to cover these up and place them outside for, well, so far I've done one day each time, but it could be a couple days before I get ready to steam this one. I did not save the leftover dye bath from our green bonus skein because, well, there's a green tint to it. So starting with a dry skein of Knit Picks Swish DK this time, which again is 100% superwash merino, I layered on the leftover yellow and black that I had rinsed from the syringes and the extra that I had just mixed, knowing that the black is going to by far dominate the yellow, but I was still really curious to see how this would turn out. And I did add a healthy splash of vinegar in there so that way the colors would set, and set this outside with the rest of the minis. The next day, looking at the yellow, I do see some subtle differences between each of the samples. It's just, again, less extreme than what we saw with the green and with the purple. What's really interesting to me is that we have a lot of very mossy feeling greens here. In contrast to when we mixed our Kelly green with the black, we had a lot more hunter greens and we had a lot of depth there. These are definitely, a lot of them are giving me more moss. And once again, I'm feeling really, really excited by one in the middle row on the far right. For whatever reason, that combination of a 0.125% depth of shade of black with a 0.0625% of whatever other color really, really draws me in and excites me every single time. But anyway, I went ahead and heat set all of these and our bonus skein for 30 minutes and then washed them off camera. Here we go, day 4, or I guess technically day 5 that I've been working on this. But we are now going to mix the true black and the blazing orange, setting up the containers and adding the yarn exactly as we did the previous 3 times. But my expectation is that unlike the yellow, since our orange is much more pigmented, we should see like what feels like a spotlight on the corner over the colors again. Whereas the yellow just felt like a huge jump between any of the depths of shade of yellow with the additions of black. All right, I think that we definitely have more of a gradient in our orange than we saw with the yellow, where things across the rows were more subtle. But this is less pigmented, I think, than I was expecting. So we still feel a little bit more like, okay, this corner is really pale, but the darkest orange isn't nearly as deep as maybe I thought it could be. What I am a fan of are all of these brown hues that we have from mixing the orange and black. I like those, I think, more than the mixtures of the black with the yellow, which gave us more of a mossy green feel. But now I am going to go ahead off camera, add a teaspoon of white vinegar to each of the samples. Then I will place on the covers and place these outside. And we'll use up the rest of our color on a bonus skein of straw, because this is DK weight this time. I started with the leftover dye bath from our yellow bonus skein, added a dry skein of Knit Picks straw, and then layered on, without diluting them very much, the leftover orange and black. And I really, really like the way that this color is coming through. Orange isn't always my favorite, but I think this combination is going to be very fall and earthy. So I'm excited to see how it turns out. But I set it outside with the rest of the yarn for at least 24 hours. I have picked up a really, really good pattern this week, where each morning I set up a new set of 25 and the next morning I steam set it. And honestly, I am very impressed that I think I'm finishing all of this dyeing in the span of a week versus 2 or 3. I will admit that my wrists are a little bit tired, but I am so excited to see how all of these different colors come together. I think the thing that excites me the most about the orange colors is that we ended up with both warm and cool toned brown shades, which means that I think officially the best way to mix up various browns if you have a limited color palette would be to start with an orange and then add black and use various amounts there. And you don't even necessarily need to have a pre-mixed orange dye. You could start with your red and yellow and start from that orange that you mix yourself. So I officially think that for the simplest type of brown recipe, I would start with orange and black. I forgot how much I don't like making stock solutions of Cherry Bomb. It has these streaky qualities to it that don't really dissolve. That was something that I think it's because I had a stock that wasn't labeled for a long time and I didn't remember what color it was. I love the hue of this red, but we will see. It's possible that out of all of the samples we've done thus far, this one won't cool that set, and so we'll have to get creative to heat set these once we hit that 24 to 72 hour mark. But we've been hitting 24 hours thus far. This time we are using the fingering weight sock yarn, and I will use the DK weight Swish DK for our leftover dyes once we've set up all the cups. Cherry Bomb is a cool toned red to begin with, and mixed with black, some of these are starting to lean a little bit purple. We definitely have some mauve in here and some beautiful raspberry tones. I am curious, and I don't know if I'll remember to do this at the recap, to see how similar this like most black color is across all of the 5 different mixtures with black that we've done. But hey, we have successfully mixed 125 different colors of yarn. Whether or not some of the recipes look the same, we have done it. So now I am going to go ahead and add a teaspoon of vinegar to each of these samples, put the covers on, and place them outside for, well, hopefully just 24 hours so I can be consistent. But again, I am a little nervous to see whether this color will absorb as well as the other, well, the black plus the other 4 colors have. Using the same water that I used the last 2 times for the bonus skein, I poured all of the black and most of the red. When there's those little tendrils of the red that are coating the bottom of the cup, I left those behind because they may not dissolve, and I'm just anticipating things not ending up the way I'm expecting. So we're gonna cross fingers and place this outside with the rest. But one other thing I do want to note for myself, today it is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit outside, whereas a lot of the previous days were in the 90s. So we also have a situation where even though we have these sitting outside, it's not quite as hot. And so therefore that could also be another variable in this whole process. The next morning, it was the moment of truth to start looking at our red yarn. And I had a big feeling that there would be some red undissolved dye in like strips or squiggles left behind, but we are gonna go ahead and start steam setting everything for at least 30 minutes on the stovetop. I do wanna add that each time I come inside, I always rinse off the containers before I put them down. That's why the outsides are always damp. But let's take a look. All right, I am seeing clearly some reds left in these pots. This is the deepest color. I'm seeing some red particles in there, which do indicate to me that we likely will have a fair amount of rinsing to do. I don't think that the amount of red left in would make a huge impact on the final color, but let's check. It does mean that we will potentially see a fair amount of bleeding, which is unfortunate. I am still planning to do the washing off camera, but I will definitely check back in if necessary. Now these colors are absolutely gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And I know that there are requests, I think, for me to do pink and teal, so these ones all look clear. There are definitely requests for me to do both pink and teal, which I imagine color-wise would look fairly similar to a lot of this, depending on the pink that I started with, yeah. So let's go ahead and steam set. And if I see any bleeding when I start the washing, I will pop back in. Certainly, it would be fun to do this with all kinds of other pre-mixed colors. I'm not sure how different some of them would feel from what we've seen here already, but it is a lot of fun to see how each of these different, more primary and secondary colors interact with the black to give us all these different shades. It feels very much like using one of those color picker things, and you go through and you pick the color and then how much black or white you want mixed into it. I don't know. I really am enjoying this whole process. The only regret I have is I don't think I have space to lay out all 125 minis all at one time. But certainly when we come and look at the finished dry yarn, we will look at each set of 25 and talk about what we see for all the ones that we did over the course of this video. One other thing you could do is, if there is this much color left behind, is you could add more vinegar and let the yarn sit in there for longer. However, I have a feeling that we've got some less soluble things left. Although it is curious to see how the brighter colors are more concentrated in one corner. I'm not really sure what that's about, but I don't think that this amount of color left behind, again, is enough to shift any of the colors that were in those containers. Color transfer onto the zip ties, which were white when I started, is not a good sign for bleeding. I was nervous because of that color transfer onto the zip ties, but the lightest three didn't really have much transfer at all. And so I started off washing those, and I saw a little bit of pink come out at the beginning, but it resolved and the water was clear really quickly. When I put the 10 most concentrated red skeins in the bath along with our bonus skein, we did pretty quickly start to see some bleeding. So I removed the bonus skein in case that was the source of most of it, and proceeded to wash the 10 deepest skeins, which do have some significant bleeding. The bleeding got worse whenever I added soap or eventually Synthropol. So I left this to soak in the Synthropol bath for at least 10 minutes and then started washing that bonus skein. The yarn mop only started bleeding once I added soap, and I was able to rinse that to clear. But I did go ahead and add a huge glug of white vinegar to that container because I figured I'll go ahead and add the 10 skeins that are bleeding to that acid after rinsing out the Synthropol, and then I'm going to steam set it again for 30 minutes just to try to give it another chance at setting this color. Adding the yarn to the vinegar, the bleeding all stopped. So yeah, I think that letting it soak with this vinegar to get nice and acidic and steam setting it again could be the ticket. Hopefully we have rinsed out anything that wasn't soluble, so that way anything that's left that maybe is now just sort of lightly hanging on there can get well set onto our yarn. It's time for the moment of truth. After 40 minutes of steaming and then letting it cool down really, really slowly, the yarn is cool and there is no bleeding. Woohoo! Even with the addition of soap, which is awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So now this is going to go through the spin dryer. I'm going to hang it to dry along with everything else. And now let's finally look at the finished yarn. This has to be one of my most ambitious videos ever. Probably because normally would be 5 videos worth of dyeing, but I am so glad that we have come to this moment. Now typically when I arrange a color mixing back into a triangle or a grid, I do that before twisting up the skeins to protect them. However, since I have 5 grids to recreate, I am going to go ahead and twist the minis together first and then lay out the grids, because that'll make it easier for me not only to do all 5 sets in the same lighting, but then we can have them all twisted sort of straight at the end of this part of the video. The way I'm going to keep things organized is as I twist them up, I'm just going to put the zip tie around a little bundle, so that way I can keep sets of 5 together. The twisting itself won't be so bad thanks to my new assistant, and actually since there's only 125 minis here total and they are each 20 grams versus 10 grams, the actual twisting with this won't take, it actually might take a little bit less time than some of the other videos from this series. But anyway, let's get twisted. Here are the bonus skeins that we dyed with the leftover dye we mixed for each of the cases. With the purple, we didn't have very much left, and I increased the amount of dye for the other 4, so that way I would have plenty in case I made a mistake when mixing one of the samples, which I think I did have happen one time. I think all of these are beautiful. The green feels like it's one of the most intense of the colors. It sort of stands out from the black the most, whereas I feel like I feel the black mixing in more on these ones. Ooh, I kind of wish I had a blue and a darker purple to sort of go with this collection of colors. I know that all of them are a little bit different based on how much I layered the colors on separately or not, but I think that they're all really, really fun bonus skeins. I twisted up these minis weeks ago, and I have been putting off filming the dry yarn conclusions for a while. I'm not sure quite what it is, but something, maybe because I think it's going to take a while to organize 125 different colors. I don't know, but I figured it was worth coming in and being honest about it, even though the twisting wasn't a big deal at all. I think it's partly because I couldn't decide if I wanted to lay them all out sort of like this, but organized first, or second, because then I have to do the grids for each of them that go along so we can see how the mixture of black and one of the other colors came together. So I have a feeling I'm going to film this out of order. I have a feeling also that this video will probably have the most footage of any video I've ever filmed, but I am also so proud of this project. So I'm now off camera. I briefly considered doing another time lapse, but off camera I am going to organize these so we can look at all 125 colors all together. Oh my goodness, I think this is one of my favorite flat lays ever. The one regret is I wish I had blue here as well, because then we would have a perfect rainbow with all these mixtures with black. And of course, I do have the blue that I did in another video, but not this one. So from the very top, we have the 0.625% depth of shade of our bright rainbow color. And at the very bottom, we have a 1% depth of shade of our rainbow color plus a 0.5% depth of shade of the true black. And I have to say, when I was doing each one of these individually, I wasn't sure how different some of the colors that felt a lot more gray and a lot less black would feel across the board. But every single color, I guess maybe one exception. Oh, and I have one out of place. With the exception, I think, of our purples down here, which feel really close to one another, we have 125 different colors here. This is the most number of colors I have ever dyed for a single video, and I just love the results. I mean, it impresses me that even at the palest shade, the colors are fairly well balanced with one another. And so this would work well as a pastel rainbow. Of course, the bottom skein as well would work really well for a super saturated rainbow. I mean, I knew setting this up was gonna be some amount of work, and it didn't take nearly as long as I was thinking. But this just looks so awesome. I think the last time I was this excited with the way I laid colors out was when I did all little swatches of all 50 of the 50 Nifty Americolor set. I got really, really excited, but this would make an incredible blanket or scarf or something of some kind. You like using all these different colors. Or goodness, imagine taking any one of these columns for some weaving and having like 1 or 2 strands of each color. Oh, that would be so unique and so fun, and I might need to plan something like that. I think with my new Rigid Head loom, that would be, ooh, that would be really, really, really fun to do. A little complex, but really fun. Anyway, I think as I started to say, I am not done color mixing. I know people really want to see me do some pinks mixed with blacks. It would be fun to do like brown and some other, maybe even some fluorescent colors, just to see what kind of range you get when you add that black to get the various different shades of one color. The other thing this shows is the versatility that we have from just a total of 6 colors. We created all of these from 6 colors, and we could have gone further. We could have gone even lighter with each of the rainbow colors, and we could have gone darker with the black, giving us even more range. So although I have an extensive collection of pre-mixed acid dyes at my disposal, and I love to use them, you can really mix your own colors. And really all you need are, I would say, a blue, a red, a magenta, a turquoise, a yellow, and a black. And then you can make pretty much everything else, because our purple, green, and orange here, you could mix those from the primaries yourself. You don't need to use a pre-mixed color. And so we really could have created all of this with, again, I guess, I mean less than 6 colors maybe, but still, you don't need to have all of the colors available. But now we're gonna go look at the grids of the various different colors. And again, I'm gonna pop up the blue on the screen that I did with Extreme Blue and True Black back in the day, because this could again be a handy reference. So where I have the depth of shade labels up, I recommend you just take a screenshot of them so that way you can use it as a reference. And if you're using a different, say, green than the ones that I used here today, the mixes may be slightly different, but hopefully this can help you as a starting off point as you go and try to mix your own different shades of colors. Let's not forget our fun Leave No Dye Behind skeins. It's funny because some of these colors definitely do break a little bit, just because some of them may absorb a little bit slower than the black. But in all the different ways that we layered things together, we ended up with some beautiful, subtle colorways that hopefully people will be really excited to craft with. I know I've already said this, but this video had the most footage I think I've ever had for one video. There were over 3 hours and 40 minutes of raw footage, and the filming and washing of just the dyeing portion took over 6 days. Now, unfortunately, something that I didn't film as part of this video contributed to a repetitive stress injury in my wrist. And I noticed I even mentioned earlier in this video, ooh, my wrist is really tired. I should have stopped and taken a break and spread things out more at that point. And so here is my reminder that it is important to listen to your body, and when something starts to feel uncomfortable, maybe it needs a bit of a break. And I did end up taking a break for a couple of weeks with my hand in a splint, which I think I'll talk more about in the vlog that'll come out in a couple of days. But ultimately, what contributed to the injury was that when I was filling each of those cups with 1 cup of water, I would have a big jar that I'd be holding in my right hand, and then I would be holding it and pouring to distribute the liquid. And so that holding and hovering and twisting is the act that contributed to my injury. And so when I plan to do this going forward, I will make some changes. Instead of filling up the containers on the countertop, I'm going to fill them in the sink and then carry them over one at a time. This will put less stress on my wrist and means I should be able to play with maybe 125 samples again, but without hurting my joints. But anyway, reminder, listen to your body and take care. Thankfully, my wrist is doing great. Normally, each one of these color grids would have been the result of its own video. And so I know that this one was a bit intensive, but I think that it's really fun to see them all side by side, and I think that this is a great way to finish off the 2021 Chemnitz Hanukkah samplers. And so if you've been opening up a sampler, I am curious to see if you picked out which skein was yours, looking at the huge grid of all 125 different colors. I hope that this video has helped demonstrate that you really don't need dozens of different premixed acid dye colors to get started on your dyeing journey, even though they can be really fun for speckling. Ultimately, I recommend that you get a primary yellow, red, blue, a cyan, a magenta, and then black. And with those 6 colors in hand, you can definitely mix everything that I've shown in this video today, mixing your own green, orange, and purple, but you can mix so many different colors, and then you can decide what other colors you want to add on after that. Acid dye brands usually list the different colors they consider primaries on their website, and so I would start looking there when it comes to picking your colors. There is absolutely more color mixing in my future, and I know how to do it in a way that will cause less stress to my wrist in the future, and so for that I'm very excited about, because I have so much fun mixing these colors and playing with it, and I really do refer back to these to help determine what kinds of colors I want to mix for other projects. There are 3 more videos left for the 2021 Chemnitz Hanukkah special. The next 2 videos will be me dyeing full skein colorways, one on some multi-nep yarn, and the other is a sparkle colorway. And I'm very excited for you to see those over the next 2 nights. And then finally, there will be a vlog where I'll talk more about what goes into the Hanukkah samplers, a little bit about how I made the extras and things like that, and thoughts about and debating with myself as I'm developing the colorways on things I didn't share on social media because I want to avoid spoilers. And now it's also time for me to start planning the 2022 Chemnitz Hanukkah special in earnest. Are there any techniques that you wish I had done this year that I didn't feature? Please let me know down in the comments. Once again, please subscribe, turn on notifications. Engaging with the videos is the best way you can help support the content here. And if you want other ways to help support the content, give me a follow on Instagram, go and check out my Etsy shop or my Patreon. You can find links to all of them down in the video description. I am Rebecca from Chemnitz, and thank you so much for watching.